So let's dive into something that can feel, well, impossible to get your head around. The character of God. I mean, how are we, as finite people, supposed to even begin to understand a being who is infinite? It feels like a puzzle, but a puzzle with a key. And today, we're going to find that key.
You know, right off the bat, we hit these things that just seem like total contradictions. We're told that God is completely in control, all-powerful, but then we're also told that we're responsible for our choices. We hear that God is love, but then we read about his wrath. So what gives? How can all of that be true at the exact same time?
It really does feel like a divine puzzle, doesn't it? But here's the good news. Like any good puzzle, there is a way to make the pieces fit. There's a core idea that makes it all click into place, and that's what we're going to uncover together in this explainer.
Okay, so this is the puzzle we're up against. We've got all these different attributes: knowledge, power, love, justice, wrath, and on the surface, they seem to be pulling in opposite directions. The real challenge, the goal here, is to stop seeing them as contradictions and start seeing them as a perfectly unified, coherent whole.
And here it is. This is the key that unlocks the whole thing. It's the concept of analogy. Seriously, this one idea is the tool we need to make sense of how God's character actually works and how it relates to our own.
So what in the world are we talking about when we say analogy in this context? Well, here's the breakdown. The idea is that our human attributes, our love, our wisdom, our justice, are what theologians call ektypes. Think of them as finite, flawed copies. God's attributes, on the other hand, are the archetypes, the infinite, perfect originals that our copies are based on.
And this slide just lays it out perfectly. Look at the left side. God's attributes are the original. They're complete, infinite, the source of everything. And then on the right, you have our attributes, the copy. They're partial, finite, just a reflection. Getting this difference between the source and the reflection is absolutely crucial for everything else.
All right, so let's put this key to the test. Let's take that classic theological puzzle, divine power versus human freedom. You know the question, if God is all-powerful, does that mean we have less freedom? Or is our freedom just some kind of illusion? Well, this idea of analogy shows us that's not even the right way to ask the question.
Now, check out this fantastic metaphor from the theologian Michael Horton. He says there isn't a single freedom pie to be rationed. You see, we tend to think of freedom as a limited resource, like a pie. If God gets a huge slice, that must mean our slice has to be smaller. But that's a total misunderstanding of how this works.
And here's the punchline. God's freedom is the source of our freedom. They're not in competition. He doesn't cut a slice from his infinite pie and hand it to you. No, his infinite archetypical freedom is the very thing that creates your finite ectypal pie in the first place. He's the baker, not someone fighting you for a slice.
Okay, so now that we have our key, this idea of analogy, let's use it to build out a deeper profile of God's character. Let's look at a few specific attributes and see how this all plays out.
Let's start with love. You know, the Bible doesn't just say God has love, it says God is love. That's the archetype. And it's a love that is totally free. It's a love that desires us, but doesn't need us for its own fulfillment. It's completely unconditional. It's not based on whether we're good enough or lovable enough. And this is so important, because we get this backwards all the time. We try to understand God's perfect love by looking at our own messy, needy, conditional love. But the principle of analogy forces us to flip the script. We have to start with God's perfect original love to even begin to understand our own faint reflection of it.
Now, this is where thinking by analogy gets really helpful. Because, okay, we can talk about love, but what about the attributes that sound, well, pretty negative to us? How can a perfect God be described as jealous or wrathful? Those are things we see as toxic in people.
So when the Bible talks about God being a jealous God, it is not talking about the insecure, possessive, ugly emotion that we call jealousy. No, the archetype, the original, divine version, is a holy, righteous, protective guarding of what is rightfully His glory, His promises, and His people. And just look at this comparison. Human jealousy, our flawed copy, is rooted in our own fear and insecurity. It's possessive. It wants what it doesn't have. But divine jealousy, the perfect original, is totally different. It's rooted in perfect love, and it righteously protects and guards what is already His. You see, in us, it's a weakness. In God, it's a strength. It's a form of His faithfulness. And that same exact principle, the perfect original versus our broken copy, helps us understand maybe the toughest attribute of all, wrath. God's wrath isn't some petty, out-of-control temper tantrum.
It's the necessary, righteous, and holy reaction of a perfectly good and loving being to evil and injustice. Think about it. If God wasn't angry at evil, if he just shrugged at injustice, would he really be good? His goodness actually demands his wrath against evil. So where do we see all these things? Love and wrath, mercy and justice, that seem to be in such tension with one another? Where do we see them working in perfect, seamless harmony? There's one place above all others, the cross.
This brings us to one last, really profound idea called divine simplicity. It's the doctrine that God isn't made up of different parts, like a little bit of love over here, a little bit of justice over there, and sometimes they fight. No. The idea is that God's attributes are a single, unified whole. He is not a collection of attributes. His entire being is his attributes. His love is just. His justice is loving.
And if you want to see the single clearest, most powerful testimony to this undivided character of God in all of history, you look right to the cross of Jesus Christ. It is the ultimate display of this divine simplicity in action. So let's just walk through the logic of it. On one hand, you have the dilemma. God's perfect justice demands that sin has to be dealt with. But on the other hand, his perfect love desires to save the very sinners who committed the sin. So what's the solution? The cross. It's where God doesn't compromise one attribute for another. He pours out his wrath against sin, which satisfies his justice, and he does it in a way that provides mercy, which displays his love. It's not a compromise, it is perfect, stunning harmony.
So let's just pull all these pieces of the puzzle together. To really get our heads around God's character, we have to think by analogy. We have to remember that his attributes are the perfect originals, and ours are just flawed copies. When we do that, we see that things like justice and love aren't actually in conflict. And the ultimate display of that perfect, unified character is the cross.
And that leaves us with one last thing to chew on. If God's own character is a perfect, undivided harmony of things that seem like contradictions to us, well, how might that change the way we look at all the apparent contradictions and tensions in our own lives? It suggests that maybe, just maybe, behind the puzzle, there's a profound and beautiful coherence we're only just beginning to grasp.